I never expected to spend my career digging through the darkest corners of post-war German history, but sometimes fate chooses your path for you. My name is Colonel David Richardson, United States Army, and in the summer of 1945, I found myself assigned to one of the most sensitive operations in occupied Germany, tracking down and securing the families of high-ranking Nazi officials. What I discovered about Heinrich Himmler's family would haunt me for the rest of my life, not because of what they had done, but because of what happened to them afterward and how desperately both the Allied powers and the new German government wanted their story to disappear. I was 32 years old when the war in Europe ended, a career officer who had served in intelligence operations throughout the conflict. I had seen combat in North Africa and Italy, interrogated prisoners, analyzed captured documents, and thought I understood the depths of human evil. But nothing prepared me for the assignment I received in June 1945, just weeks after Germany's surrender. The briefing took place in a requisitioned mansion outside Frankfurt, where the American occupation forces had established their headquarters. Major General William Harrison, a stern Texan with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much war, sat behind a mahogany desk that had probably belonged to some Nazi official just months before. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Richardson, you speak German fluently, correct?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. My mother had been from Munich, emigrating to America in 1920, and I had grown up speaking both languages. "Yes, sir. Native fluency." "Good. You're being assigned to Operation Family Tree. We're locating and securing the immediate family members of top Nazi leadership. Most are trying to hide, change their identities, disappear into the chaos. We need to find them before they can escape, or before something worse happens to them." "Something worse, sir?" Harrison's expression darkened. "There are a lot of angry people in Germany right now, Richardson. Concentration camp survivors, forced laborers, citizens who lost everything. Some of these families, especially the children, are in real danger. We need to get to them first, document who they are, and decide what to do with them." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs and documents relating to Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS, architect of the Holocaust, and one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. Himmler had committed suicide on May 23, 1945, biting down on a cyanide capsule while in British custody. But his family was still out there, somewhere in the ruins of the Third Reich. Himmler had a wife, Margaret, and a daughter, Gudrun, who was 16 years old when the war ended, Harrison explained. "There's also evidence of a mistress and possibly other children. Your job is to find them, secure them, and report back. This is classified at the highest level. The British are handling some aspects, but we want our own eyes on this." I spent the next 2 weeks gathering intelligence, interviewing captured SS officers, and following leads across Bavaria. The work was tedious and often depressing, trudging through destroyed cities where hollow-eyed civilians picked through rubble looking for anything salvageable. The stench of death still hung over Germany that summer, a physical presence that clung to your clothes and invaded your dreams. My investigation led me to a small town near Lake Constance, where Margaret Himmler and her daughter Gudrun had been living under assumed names. They had been arrested by American forces in early May and were being held in a detention facility, a former hotel that now housed dozens of Nazi wives, mistresses, and children awaiting processing. I arrived at the facility on a grey morning in late June. The building was surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards, looking more like a prison than a hotel. Inside, the atmosphere was tense and surreal. Women who had lived in luxury just months before, attended by servants and draped in finery stolen from murdered Jews, now wore threadbare clothes and stood in line for meager rations. The facility commander, Captain James Morrison, a weary-looking man from Ohio, briefed me on the situation. "The Himmler woman is defiant," he said, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. "Refuses to cooperate, insists her husband was a patriot, claims she knew nothing about the camps. The daughter is worse. True believer. She worships her father's memory." "I need to interview them both," I said, "separately and together. I need to understand their situation and make recommendations about their future." Morrison laughed bitterly. "Their future? Colonel, these people don't have a future. They're pariahs. The Himmler name is synonymous with everything evil about the Nazi regime. What kind of future could they possibly have?" It was a question I would grapple with for months to come. I met Margarete Himmler first, in a small interview room with barred windows overlooking the mountains. She was 54 years old, a stout woman with graying blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was lined with bitterness and defiance, her eyes cold and unrepentant. "I have nothing to say to you," she said in German before I could even introduce myself. "My husband was a great man who served his country. The victors write the history, but that doesn't make it true." I sat down across from her, maintaining a neutral expression. "Mrs. Himmler, I'm not here to debate history or politics. I'm here to assess your situation and make recommendations about your case. That could work in your favor or against you, depending on your cooperation." "Cooperation?" she spat. "You mean betraying my husband's memory? Denouncing everything he stood for? I would rather die." "Your husband orchestrated the murder of millions of people," I said quietly. "He built the extermination camps. He organized the Einsatzgruppen. He turned genocide into an industrial process. These are documented facts, not allied propaganda." Her face flushed red. "Lies. All lies. Heinrich was dedicated to protecting Germany from its enemies. If harsh measures were necessary, it was because of the threat we faced. I had interviewed enough Nazis to recognize the pattern: denial, justification, victimhood. They had convinced themselves that they were the ones who had been wronged, that history would eventually vindicate them. It was both pathetic and terrifying. "What about your daughter?" I asked, changing tactics. "Gudrun is 16 years old. Her entire life is ahead of her. Don't you want something better for her than being forever known as Himmler's daughter?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of something human in Margaret's eyes. Fear, perhaps, or maternal concern. Gudrun is a smart, loyal girl. She loved her father deeply. This is destroying her. "Then help me help her," I said. "Tell me about your family situation. I know your husband had a mistress, Hedwig Potthast. I know there were other children. I need the full picture." Margaret's face hardened again. "That woman was a homewrecker. Heinrich is one weakness. Yes, he had children with her. 2 of them, I believe. I never acknowledged them, and I never will." Over the course of several interviews, I pieced together the complicated family situation. Himmler had maintained 2 households: his official family with Margaret and Gudrun, and a secret second family with Hedwig Potthast, with whom he had 2 children, Helga and Nanette Dorothea. This dual life was typical of the Nazi elite, who preached traditional family values while indulging in whatever they wanted. My interview with Gudrun Himmler was even more disturbing. She was a pretty girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, the perfect Aryan child her father had envisioned for the 1,000-year Reich. But her eyes held a fanatical light that reminded me uncomfortably of photographs I had seen of Hitler youth rallies. "My father was the greatest man who ever lived," she told me in our first meeting, her voice steady and clear. "He was kind, loving, and dedicated to making Germany strong. Everything they say about him is Jewish propaganda." I felt my stomach turn. "Gudrun, I've been to the camps. I've seen the gas chambers, the crematoriums, the piles of bodies. I've spoken to survivors. This isn't propaganda, it's reality." "Then the reality has been staged," she replied without hesitation. "My father would never have done those things. He was incapable of such cruelty. Your father ran the SS. He personally oversaw the construction of Auschwitz. He received regular reports on the number of people murdered. These are documented facts from captured German records." She shook her head, that fanatical certainty never wavering. "I don't care what documents you claim to have. I knew my father. I knew his heart. He was a good man." I realized then that Gudrun was lost, at least for now. She had been so thoroughly indoctrinated, so completely devoted to her father and the Nazi ideology, that no amount of evidence would shake her belief. She was 16 years old, and her worldview had been shaped by one of history's greatest monsters. What kind of life awaited her? My investigation into Hedwig Potthast and her children took me to a small village in Bavaria, where they were living under assumed names in desperate poverty. The contrast with Margaret's defiance was striking. Hedwig was terrified, broken, and willing to cooperate with anything if it meant protecting her children. "Please," she begged when I found her in a tiny apartment above a bakery. "My children have done nothing wrong. They're innocent. Helgi is only 5 years old and Nanette is barely 3. They don't even understand who their father was." She was 34 years old, blonde and attractive, even in her current reduced circumstances. Her hands shook as she poured ersatz coffee into chipped cups, and her eyes darted nervously to the door, as if expecting arrest at any moment. "I'm not here to punish your children," I assured her, "but I need to understand the full situation. How long were you involved with Himmler?" "Since 1941, she said quietly. "I was his secretary. He pursued me. I was young, flattered by the attention of such a powerful man. I didn't know." I didn't understand what he was really doing. You never asked? Never wondered about the camps, the deportations, the murders? Her face crumpled. Of course I wondered, but Heinrich kept that part of his life separate from our family. When he came to visit us, he was just a father playing with his children, a man who seemed to love me. I told myself that the rumors couldn't be true, that the man I knew could never do such things. I was a coward. I didn't want to know the truth. At least she could admit it, which was more than Margaret had done. What are your plans now? Plans? She laughed bitterly. Colonel, I have no plans. No money, no prospects, and a name that will destroy my children's lives if anyone discovers who they are. I'm changing our surname, moving somewhere remote, and praying that we can disappear. I looked at the two small children playing with wooden blocks in the corner of the room, oblivious to the weight of their father's legacy. They were innocent, born into circumstances they couldn't control, now condemned to carry a name synonymous with evil. I'll do what I can to help, I said, and I meant it. The army can provide some assistance with relocation and documentation, but you need to understand that this will follow you. People will eventually figure out who you are, who they are. You need to prepare for that. Hedwig nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, but at least I can give them a few years of normalcy. A few years before they have to bear the burden of what their father did. Over the following months, I compiled comprehensive reports on the Himmler family situation. The Allied command and the emerging German authorities faced a difficult question: what to do with the families of Nazi leaders. They hadn't committed crimes themselves, at least not ones we could prove, but they were living symbols of a regime that had nearly destroyed civilization. The decision that emerged was as pragmatic as it was troubling. Make them disappear, not literally, but bureaucratically and historically. Change their names. Relocate them to different parts of Germany or abroad. Suppress information about their whereabouts and let them fade into obscurity. The new German government, desperate to move past the Nazi era and rebuild its international reputation, fully supported this approach. I attended meetings in Frankfurt and Berlin where officials debated the Himmler family's fate. Some argued for harsh measures, permanent internment, exile, or publicizing their identities to ensure they could never escape their legacy. Others advocated for mercy, especially for the children who bore no responsibility for their father's crimes. We're trying to build a democracy, one German official argued, a social democrat who had spent the Nazi years in exile. That means we don't punish children for their parents' sins. It means we give people the opportunity to redeem themselves, even if their names are Himmler or Goering or Goebbels. But we also can't allow these families to rehabilitate the Nazi image, countered an American colonel. Gudrun Himmler is already a true believer. What happens when she's older, when she starts giving interviews, when she tries to whitewash her father's legacy? The compromise was bureaucratic suppression. Margaret and Gudrun were released from custody in November 1945 after promising to use assumed names and avoid any public statements about the Nazi regime. They were placed under surveillance and their movements restricted. Hedwig and her children were given new identities and relocated to a different part of Germany with financial assistance to start over. But the most disturbing aspect of the whole operation was the systematic effort to bury the story. Documents were classified, interviews sealed, photographs suppressed. The German government, with Allied support, wanted the Himmler family to simply disappear from public consciousness. They were afraid that any attention to the families would either generate sympathy for them or keep the wounds of the Nazi era open when everyone wanted to move forward. I found this deeply troubling. We're erasing history, I told Major General Harrison during one of our final meetings on the subject. Future generations need to know what happened to these families. They need to understand the full scope of the Nazi legacy, including its impact on the perpetrators' children. Harrison shook his head. Richardson, sometimes history is messy. Sometimes there are things better left buried. The Himmler family's fate is one of them. We've documented everything in classified files. Historians can access them eventually. But right now, Germany needs to heal, and that means not constantly picking at the scab. I understood the logic, but I didn't agree with it. History shouldn't be sanitized or hidden for the sake of convenience. But I was a soldier, not a policymaker, and I followed my orders. I kept track of the Himmler family over the years, even after I left Germany and returned to the United States. Margarete died in 1967, having lived a quiet life under an assumed name, never renouncing her husband or his ideology. Gudrun, however, became exactly what the officials had feared: an unrepentant defender of her father's legacy and a prominent figure in far-right circles. She helped create support networks for aging SS veterans, worked to rehabilitate the Nazi image, and never wavered in her belief that her father was a hero. Hedwig Potthast and her children did manage to disappear, at least for a time. They changed their names, moved frequently, and avoided publicity. The children grew up not knowing their true identity until they were adults, when Hedwig finally told them the truth about their father. I heard through intelligence channels that Helgi, the son, struggled deeply with the revelation, while Nanette tried to distance herself completely from the Himmler name. What haunted me most over the years was the question of justice and mercy, guilt and innocence. Were we right to help these families disappear? Were we protecting innocent children or enabling the escape of people who should have been held accountable? Margaret certainly knew about her husband's activities, even if she chose to blind herself to the details. Gudrun was young, but old enough to absorb and perpetuate the ideology. Hedwig claimed ignorance, but could anyone really be that close to Himmler and not know? I retired from the army in 1968 as a colonel, having served in Korea and Vietnam after my time in Germany. But it was those months in 1945, dealing with the Himmler family and other Nazi relatives, that stayed with me more than any combat I experienced. I had witnessed the messy, uncomfortable reality of what happens after genocide, when you have to decide what to do with the families of monsters. In my later years, I wrote a memoir about my experiences, though I had to wait until certain documents were declassified before I could tell the full story. I wanted people to understand why Germany and the Allies buried the Himmler family story, and what the consequences of that decision were. The consequences were mixed. On one hand, Hedwig's children and other Nazi descendants who genuinely wanted to escape their legacy were able to build new lives. They married, had families, contributed to society under different names, unburdened by their father's crimes. That was a form of mercy that seemed humane. On the other hand, the suppression of information created an information vacuum that allowed figures like Gudrun to operate more freely. Without public scrutiny, without historical documentation readily available, she was able to work in the shadows, building networks that kept Nazi ideology alive. The very secrecy meant to protect some family members actually protected others who should have been watched more closely. Moreover, the buried story denied the world a full accounting of the Nazi legacy. People needed to see what happened to these families to understand that the consequences of following evil leaders extend beyond the leaders themselves. They needed to grapple with the difficult questions about guilt, responsibility, and redemption that these families represented. I think about Gudrun Himmler, who died in 2018 at the age of 88, never having renounced her father or his crimes. She spent her entire life defending the indefensible, providing aid and comfort to war criminals, and spreading revisionist history. The decision to let her live quietly under surveillance, rather than exposing her activities, allowed her to do far more damage than if her story had been public from the beginning. I think about those two small children I saw playing with blocks in that tiny apartment, Helga and Nanette, innocent victims of their father's evil. They deserved the chance to escape, to build lives free from that burden. But did they also deserve to know the truth from an early age? Did hiding their identity actually protect them, or did it just delay the inevitable reckoning? These are questions I never fully answered, even after decades of reflection. What I do know is that the decision to bury the Himmler family story was driven by a combination of pragmatic politics, genuine humanitarian concern, and a desire to move past the Nazi era as quickly as possible. Germany wanted to rebuild its reputation and couldn't afford to have constant reminders of its darkest chapter. The Allies wanted stability in Europe and didn't want to deal with the complications that Nazi families represented. But history has a way of refusing to stay buried. Slowly, over the decades, information about the Himmler family and other Nazi descendants leaked out. Journalists investigated, historians researched, and the full story gradually emerged. What we buried in 1945 eventually saw the light of day, though it took decades. The lesson I drew from all this is that you can't erase the past no matter how uncomfortable it makes you. You can suppress it, hide it, classify it, but eventually the truth emerges. And when it does, the suppression itself becomes part of the story, often making things worse than if you had been honest from the beginning. The fate of Heinrich Himmler's family after World War II is a story of complicated morality, difficult choices, and unintended consequences. It's a story Germany and the Allies wanted to bury because it raised questions they didn't want to answer and revealed truths they didn't want to face. But it's also a story that needed to be told because understanding what happened to the families of evil men is part of understanding evil itself. As I sit here now, an old man looking back on a long career and a complicated life, I still wonder if we made the right choices. I wonder if those children deserved better protection or more accountability. I wonder if Gudrun could have been reached if we had tried harder, or if she was already too far gone by the time the war ended. I wonder if the secrecy we imposed actually served anyone's interests in the long run. What I don't wonder about is whether the story deserved to be buried. It didn't. History, no matter how dark or uncomfortable, needs to be told. The fate of the Himmler family is part of the historical record, part of the accounting we all must face when we confront the legacy of the Nazi regime. They tried to bury this story, but like all buried truths, it eventually clawed its way to the surface. And now that it's here in the light, we have to decide what to do with it. We have to grapple with the same questions that haunted me in 1945. How do we balance justice and mercy? How do we hold people accountable while protecting the innocent? How do we move forward from evil without forgetting what happened? I don't have all the answers, but I know that burying the story was never going to be the solution. The truth demands to be known, and the Himmler family's fate is truth we all need to understand, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us.